Welcome, welcome to Earth Week for everyone. My name is Rachel Rosner. I'm the president of Citizens Greener Evanston, also known as CGE. I'm a lifelong Evanstonian and a Leadership Evanston alumna. And I want to start with a few housekeeping items. We're recording this session already. It will be made available later. Because it's a webinar format, we can't see you. You can communicate by putting your questions in the Q&A. That will be the easiest way for me to find your questions when the time comes. Use the chat judiciously so it doesn't distract from our presentations. And bear with us. This is our very first session and we're all volunteers, but I think it's going to be amazing. I wanted to give a quick outline of this morning's session. I'm going to do an overview of Earth Week for everyone. Then we will hear from Colleen O'Brien and Grace Wickerson about their climate action efforts at Northwestern. They are graduate students there, followed by Vicki Jacobson of Go Evanston, who will be sharing tips on sustainable travel. And then we'll have a combined Q&A for everyone at the end of all of that. So I'm super proud and thrilled by what our all volunteer team has put together for the coming days. We're going to be thanking them by name on Friday at our CGE's 10th anniversary celebration, and we really hope you can join us. You can imagine the number of meetings and emails and hours that went into this effort, but this team has actually made it fun. And a special thanks to Evanston Public Library and CGE's Bea Echeverria, who is our Zoom host today and has been a huge help. As we embark on this multi-day deep dive into climate justice and related topics, I want to take a moment to just invite you to check in with your feelings. We're dealing with so many emotions this historic week with the just verdict in the George Floyd case, providing collective relief and hope while also creating a glaring contrast to the lack of justice for so many others. Most recently and locally, 13-year-old Adam Toledo in Chicago. All of this on top of our weariness from this pandemic might make a person feel like a couple days thinking about the climate crisis is daunting. I attended a conference by Project Drawdown, a team of scientists who've ranked the top 100 climate solutions. And there I was taken by a presentation by climate psychologist Renee Lertzman, who said that we need to feel our feelings and connect with one another before we can step into action. So with that, I invite you just to take a moment, notice your breathing, feel your feet on the ground, and check in with yourself. In addition to these mindful pauses and connecting with nature, what helps me most is being part of a community that's working to make change. We know that in order for Evanston, Illinois, the United States, and the world to reach our climate goals, we need everyone to be a part of the conversation, and that is not currently the case. Some hear the word green and think of Whole Foods, Teslas, and solar panels, and that they can't afford it. I'll be talking tomorrow about why cheap is green or economical is ecological. Many feel that this is a conversation only for scientists and policy wonks. While they are critical, so is everyone else. Youth voices, artists, teachers and parents, business owners are all essential, which is why we have woven them into this programming. I was trained by Al Gore as a climate reality leader in 2018. And months later, I embarked on a 9-month seed training seeking equity and educational diversity that's offered through District 65. In many ways, these felt like parallel paths. Many climate activists have a singular and urgent focus. We have a hard deadline by which to reach carbon neutrality in order to prevent the worst. Many people of color and their allies are focused on immediate day-to-day injustices. Some citing Maslow's hierarchy of needs when I would push my environmental agenda. Climate justice is where these two paths intersect. And I recently learned the term climate reparations, a concept I'm eager to explore, especially in our town, now famous for making reparations history. The climate crisis and other forms of environmental degradation are caused by the very mindset and systems that oppress and harm people of color. As with COVID-19, the climate crisis has the gravest impact on those with the fewest resources. To quote Hop Hopkins from his Sierra article, "Racism is Killing the Planet," you can't have climate change without sacrifice zones. You can't have sacrifice zones without disposable people. And you can't have disposable people without racism. Still, the environmental movement is historically and currently largely white. There's much to consider about the reasons for this, and many organizations, including CGE, are beginning to do this work. With all of this in mind, when we conceptualized Earth Week for Everyone, we made a great effort to find intersectional content to engage a wide audience. It's our great hope that you will find something on this extensive menu that sparks your interest. I had the great joy of visiting the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in December of 2016. It was a formative experience for me as I saw this incredible community, an activist city of 11,000 people came together in tents and yurts and teepees around the issue in the snow, around the issue of protecting water, keeping fossil fuels in the ground, indigenous rights, and human rights. There were artists and activists. It was political and spiritual. There were cooks and donation sorters and speakers and dancers, elders and kids and veterans. 200 tribes were represented, but also Black, Latinx, and white people. Everyone had a place. This is my vision for our town. Everyone working together, each in their own way, to protect planet and people. CGE is a spoke in the wheel of this bigger movement. We're also a hub for several related programs where you can connect. Edible Evanston, which supports and educates food growers, has facilitated the donation of thousands of pounds of fresh produce to local food pantries. Natural Habitat Evanston got Evanston certified as a national wildlife habitat by certifying so many gardens and public spaces. You'll hear more from them tomorrow. Beyond Waste, which in normal times hosts the repair clinic at YOU, where volunteers help fix everything from bikes to blouses. Watershed Collective is working on all things water, from beach access to flood mitigation to clean drinking water. Environmental Justice Evanston is hosting a panel this afternoon. I hope you'll attend. Our Energy Committee, which spearheaded this event, was led by Joel Freeman, and who brings new meaning to the term Energy Committee, and Go Evanston, which you'll be hearing from shortly. Our goal for this program is for you to learn about ways to change your habits, change the culture, and change the system. From architecture to zero waste, sustainable landscaping to renewable energy, we have a wealth of community experts sharing their wisdom. This afternoon and evening, we have an amazing lineup, including a panel on greening Evanston schools, a green business brainstorm for entrepreneurs of color, co-hosted by the Evanston NAACP, where all are welcome. There's much to learn. An environmental justice panel after that, and then a presentation from Teddy Peterson on the Mitchell Museum of the American Indian, talking about the importance of land acknowledgements. And we'll end the day with a conversation with Mayor-elect Daniel Biss. We have other elected officials on the docket tomorrow. Deb Shore, Commissioner for the Water Reclamation District, will be talking about water justice. And at our 10th anniversary celebration, we have Alderman Simmons, Ravel, and Alderman-elect Newsma, among others. Saturday, we have an update about state and national legislation around climate with Congresswoman Schakowsky and our state reps, Gable, Fine, and Gong Gershowitz. We'll also be hearing from city staff and students from 4th grade to PhDs, among others. We really want to emphasize that there is no right or wrong way to do this work, whether you change a habit, join a committee, run for office, or just commit to staying informed by getting on CGE's mailing list. We welcome you to Earth Week for Everyone. So without further ado, here we go. It's my pleasure to introduce Colleen O'Brien and Grace Wickerson, who will be discussing their work with the Science and Policy Outreach Task Force, SPOT, at Northwestern to encourage the university to adopt more ambitious climate goals and increase collaboration with the city of Evanston and other key stakeholders to address climate change and build climate resilience. Colleen is a PhD candidate in environmental engineering at Northwestern. Her research explores the use of urban green spaces for stormwater management and flood prevention and the design of multifunctional green infrastructure. Her previous experience includes stormwater consulting for municipalities in Massachusetts and work in the nonprofit sector. Grace is a PhD student in materials science and engineering at Northwestern, and their research focuses on the design and implementation of biodegradable, biocompatible therapeutic medical devices for chronic diseases. In addition, they are also working on public health policy efforts that address systemic racism in healthcare spaces and lack of access to high-tech interventions they work on. Take it away, Grace and Colleen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you all for having us here today. I'm just gonna pull up my screen. Okay, great. So thank you again for having us. We're gonna be talking about community engagement for climate resilience and specifically Northwestern's role as a collaborator on sustainability here in Evanston. So thank you for that wonderful introduction, Rachel. Just again, my name is Colleen O'Brien. I'm a PhD candidate in environmental engineering at Northwestern, and I'll pass it over to my colleague, Grace.
And yeah, again, hi everyone. I'm Grace. I'm a PhD student in materials science and engineering. And yeah, Colleen and I came together a few months ago through this organization that Rachel introduced, the Science Policy Outreach Task Force. Essentially, it is a collective of PhD students and other graduate students that are very interested in the topic of how do we translate our research into policy that can make impact on people's lives. And so we came together to discuss ways that Northwestern could improve upon its sustainability efforts as it was reviewing its sustainability strategic plan. And so we both kind of got very interested in the topic of what does community engagement look like, as the previous plan had only a few bullets that were relevant to engagement with Evanston, and definitely felt like there was a lot of room for improvement in those areas. I don't know, Colleen, you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, thanks, Grace. And so in that process, we spoke with a number of community members about their experience collaborating with Northwestern and their perceptions of Northwestern's role as a collaborator in sustainability here in Evanston and how Northwestern could improve in that community collaboration. We also did our own review of Northwestern's sustainability goals, the progress that they've made towards those goals, and how those goals fit into the larger framework of the City of Evanston's goals for climate resilience, specifically those outlined in the city's Climate Action Resilience Plan, CARP. And so we're going to start with just a brief review of Northwestern sustainability goals, the progress that they've made towards those goals, and then go through the recommendations that we presented to Northwestern for how to improve this community engagement and collaboration. So on the left-hand side is listed the goals that Northwestern included as their commitment towards CARP. And then on the right-hand side is the progress that have been made towards those goals as of 2020. So the first goal was to reduce energy use intensity, which is the energy use per square foot of space, by 20% below 2010 levels by the year 2020. And so last year, Northwestern did achieve a 24.9% reduction in building energy use intensity from 2010, though some of this reduction may have been due to pretty drastic changes in activity due to COVID-19 restrictions. At the time that these restrictions were put in place, Northwestern was still on track to meet that goal, but it'll be interesting to see what these numbers look like this year and next year as activities on campus begin to ramp up a bit more. The second goal was to increase landfill diversion rates to 50% of total waste generated, again by 2020. Last year, the university achieved a landfill diversion rate of 40%, so didn't quite reach that 50% goal, and still some work there to get there. And lastly, the last goal was to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 and an interim goal to reduce scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, which includes direct emissions from the university and emissions related to energy production for electricity or heating or any other fuels needed to run the university. And that interim goal is to reduce those emissions by 30% from baseline 2012 by 2030. And so last year, the university achieved a 15.4% reduction in those scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So based on this review that we conducted and our conversations with community members, we came up with 4 main recommendations for how Northwestern can improve community engagement with the city of Evanston to allow for further collaboration towards climate resilience and sustainability. And we presented these recommendations in a written memo, and also as a presentation to the Sustainability Committee at Northwestern last month. So I'll just briefly read these recommendations and then we'll go through each in a bit more detail. So our first recommendation was to set more ambitious goals in line with the city's Climate Action and Resilience Plan, CARP, to increase accountability and transparency on those goals, to provide more opportunities for collaboration with the city, and to ensure equity and justice with Northwestern's climate actions. So this first recommendation to set more ambitious goals came again from that review of Northwestern's sustainability goals and how they fit into this larger framework of Evanston's goals, particularly those outlined in CARP. And so you can see in this figure below on the top is where Northwestern currently stands on their emissions reductions and what their future goals are. And then on the bottom are Evanston's goals that they've outlined in CARP. And we've the top line in those Evanston's goals is as they're written in the CARP plan, and the bottom is we converted them to be equivalent to 2012 baseline to allow for easier comparison between Northwestern goals and Evanston goals. And you can see that there's a pretty large discrepancy between the goals that Northwestern has set forward and the goals that Evanston has set forward. Both hope to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, but the way they get there is very different. And so Northwestern has currently achieved a 15% reduction in emissions, whereas in 5 years from now in 2025, Evanston hopes to achieve the equivalent of a 55% reduction. 5 years later, Northwestern's still only looking to achieve a 30% reduction. So our main recommendation here was to revise and revisit these goals to make sure that they're ambitious enough that Northwestern can achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, and therefore also allowing Evanston to reach carbon neutrality. Our second recommendation really stemmed from these conversations that we had with community members to increase the transparency on how these goals are set and the progress that's being made towards these goals, and to create a system of accountability for Northwestern. So our recommendation here was to provide an annual update summarizing the progress towards those goals and plans to achieve future goals and current goals that haven't yet been met. And then to share that progress and those plans with the larger community outside of Northwestern itself by publishing them in local newspapers or as a spotlight in Citizens Greener Evanston so that they reach a community outside just the university itself. And now I will pass it over to Grace.
And yes, so this kind of second half, beyond just being more responsible and accountable to these goals of carbon neutrality, is to better open themselves up to collaborations with city members ranging from governments to nonprofits to individuals. What we heard is that Northwestern often feels like a sort of opaque organization, even if there are many, many researchers with highly relevant research and interest to community members working towards climate justice and sustainability. And so we kind of recommendation 3 encompasses some recommendations around this area, with the largest one being a collaborative climate summit. So this is something that Khalid and I are definitely going to work and think more about. But what the idea behind this recommendation would be to bring together researchers, sustainability committee members, upper administration, and members of the Evanston community to start the conversation around how we can build climate resilience in our community, what are our roles and responsibilities, and how can we collaborate better together. and form those deep ties and relationships that right now feel more difficult to do. And so this summit would kick off a lot more efforts to collaborate within the city of Evanston for sustainability. After this summit, some other ideas we were thinking about is Northwestern have recently released grants for racial justice in healthcare and other spaces. But what we saw lacking in those grants was a focus on climate justice and climate change, despite the intersections of climate justice in all of our sort of well-being efforts. And so we thought more about how can those grants also extend to climate work and thinking about the intersections of that work as well. Another thing we recommended was a public-facing database of researchers so that community members can find academic research that interests them and connect to their goals. Having a university in your backyard is an immense benefit, but doesn't fully benefit you when you don't understand maybe what's going on there. You can't really find the research that is beneficial to you. And so this could also come out of the summit as we learn what researchers are interested in working with community members. And the final recommendation is for our students. So for grad students like Colleen and I and undergraduates, we all have huge passions for the environment and sustainability, but might not know where we can plug in, where we can sustain and support. There's definitely been recommendations of new internship opportunities, boys curricular opportunities could allow for students to do project-based work. And so we think that those kind of efforts would allow for students to become a working force for climate justice and be better connected to the city of Evanston and its goals for sustainability. And next slide. And the final thing that we recommend was around equity and justice with Northwestern's climate actions. And especially important with Rachel's introduction is that the climate movement has often excluded Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and Northwestern is no different. In their the previous sustainability report, there is little mention of disparate impacts on people of color and how equity and justice integrate with climate. And so we were thinking specifically about how we could make that more intentional, especially using the resources that Northwestern has. So thinking about how faculty and students could specifically be reaching out to BIPOC communities, thinking about, energy auditing was an example we heard, as some community members would not be able to afford energy auditing. And so how could students play a role in doing that work? Thinking more about how Northwestern can play a role in generating climate resilience plans, and also, again, wield its resources as a huge energy user in the Evanston community. Thinking more about like policy efforts, again, with like public-facing researchers, more collaboration there. How could they also contribute to climate resilience efforts in Evanston, and then collaborate with the city of Evanston to implement them, and again, be sort of a case study for the rest of the country. And finally, we have a lot of infrastructure that sustains our university. So how can we ensure that the way we integrate those infrastructures is mindful of climate impact and also mindful of impact on vulnerable communities? Next slide. So our call to action is to support us in this work. We are, again, 2 grad students. We're very passionate about this, but we know that climate justice takes a community. And to continue to hold Northwestern accountable, we need people that are knocking on their doors and saying they need to be out there and collaborating, especially given, again, their huge footprint in Evanston. And so we believe that together we can continue to work towards plans that are further focused on equity and justice and inclusive for all of our members of this community. And with that, thank you. I know we'll take questions later, but we're just excited to be here and share this work with y'all.
That was so exciting to hear. Thank you so much, Grace and Colleen. I cannot wait for this discussion that will commence shortly, but this is really massive and critical work. Yeah, well, more later. I want to encourage folks to use the Q&A. We would love your questions and thoughts when we begin our discussion. And now we get to hear from Vicki Jacobson, my friend and colleague. She's a transportation planner who is passionate about cities and streets that serve everyone, regardless of age, ability, gender, income, or mode of travel. Her current work is devoted to improving travel safety for all travelers in the Chicago region through design, policy, education, and collaboration. She helped to develop the City of Evanston's Climate Action and Resilience Plan and helped found Go Evanston, an advocacy organization that supports the right to walk, bicycle, and use transit. Take it away, Vicki.
Thanks. Is my audio okay?
A little funky, Vicki.
Way better? Let me
Keep talking.
try it. Let me try it without my headphones. How's that?
Yeah, I think it's better without the headphones.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody, happy Earth Day, happy Earth Week, happy spring. I'm really happy to be here and share with you some of the work that Go Evanston has done, and we've put together a couple ways in which we can all get to our destination together. Let's Go Evanston. Go Evanston is the organization that Rachel just mentioned, and I am going to talk a little bit about some strategies we can all employ. So who we are, Rachel talked a little bit about this. Go Evanston was founded in 2016. When we are a mobility advocacy organization, and we support, as Rachel said, the right for all travelers to have safe, convenient, and joyful transportation. I mean, getting around from places to place can be a really happy experience if it's done right, and that's part of our mission. We do our advocacy work in a couple of ways. We saw a real need for education on the topic of mobility and to understand the trade-offs that we make every day when we make our choices and when we build our infrastructure. And that education effort is for everyone. We saw a role for education in our elected officials, in the general public and users of our transportation system. Another piece of our advocacy work is engagement, and that's the more political aspect and committee work that we've gotten involved in at the city to help guide decision making so that it's sustainable and equitable and mobility friendly. And then we also have an encouragement piece, which is kind of like the fun side. It's the event side of mobility. It's when people get out and ride their bikes on Bike the Ridge in the fall, and we can celebrate mobility in a way that's kind of fun and gets people excited about it. We're very action oriented, meaning we like events and we like to see results of our work. We have a serious side, meaning we can get really serious on topical issues like equity and the fairness of our transportation system, but we like to have fun too. And we became part of the CGE family shortly after we were founded, and we've recently joined forces closer with the Transportation Task Force, which is a longstanding transportation committee in CGE. So don't worry, I'm not going to talk about all of these things today, but this helps explain why I'm so passionate about mobility, because it's a big wheel and there are a lot of spokes to it. It touches very closely on all the topics here on the screen. Obviously, in honor of Earth Day, we're going to talk a little bit about the way mobility interacts with climate change, but mobility is absolutely an economic development tool connecting people to jobs. It's an affordability tool for addressing equity issues. I'll talk a little bit about transit in my presentation, but I'm also passionate about each aspect of these topics. It's a public health issue. I will get on my soapbox a little bit about the role of mobility for children today, but for those of you who know me really well, I could talk ad nauseum about any one of these topics. Transportation represents about a third of greenhouse gas emissions in our country. It's a little lower in a place like Evanston, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why that's true. So Evanston is actually it's really a great place to live if you like mobility options, and that is reflected in the data that is collected. So the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning produces community snapshots where they talk about the mode of travel to work, I meant to apologize for jargon. Transportation planners are famous for using jargon. Mode of travel simply refers to the way in which somebody travels. So walking is a mode, bicycling is a mode, transit is a mode, driving is a mode. So I'm sure I'll throw out other jargon terms and just call me on it. So you can see by the numbers here that Evanston's, for example, look at our transit ridership. It's almost at 25%. And this is pre-pandemic. It's important to note that 2020 kind of, threw everything off. But if you want to look at the national comparisons, in Evanston, almost 25% of our population commutes using transit. Nationally, that's 5%. We have almost 15% that walk or bike to work. Nationally, that's 3%. So it's something to celebrate. And, I'm also a mom, so I'm going to say, but we can always do better, right? So Evanston is an extremely walkable place. There's a cool website that was developed a few years ago, I think with the intention of becoming a planning tool. It ended up becoming a real estate tool, which is actually equally fascinating. It's called walkscore.com, and it's a way that people decide where to live based on the type of community it is in terms of walkability. So if you want to live in a place where you can walk to a coffee shop and you can walk to a grocery store, you can look it up. You can even look up neighborhoods, and they have different criteria for how they rate cities. It's very cool, and it's cool to know that Evanston is considered a very walkable community. So 5 ways to even further our effort to make our mobility system in Evanston super strong and diverse and affordable and equitable. Teach our children. This is something that we have mentioned in the Climate Action and Resilience Plan. Teaching our kids safe bicycling and walking skills is critical, not just for their immediate safety, but for raising the next generation of mobility advocates. I believe that the right to walk is a human right. It's a fundamental human right in the world. And I think that starts when children should be allowed safe and convenient passage to schools. Not only is it something that promotes healthy children and is climate friendly, but it's really important, as it turns out, as a mental health solution for kids. So what you'll notice is, kids that are walking regularly to school, with or without a parent, I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, process their school days in a different way than kids that are driven to school and dropped off. The conversations that are had are much different, and there's more and more data to show the mental health benefits that children receive by walking and bicycling to school or scootering. I'm open to all forms of wheels in that regard. It's more important than ever in the pandemic. We've seen access to nature and fresh air and all of these things become increasingly important to people as we spend so much time indoors, especially after the winter. It also creates a culture where children become more aware of how to move safely through our community, and they actually end up becoming better drivers in the future. There's some new data to show that kids who receive skills to walk and bicycle safely become better drivers. And May 5th is National Bike to School Day, in case anybody's wanting to make a special occasion out of that. This is something that I just saw on Twitter this morning, and I just wanted to throw it into the presentation quickly. This is a list on the left of things kids have sacrificed for drivers, playing on their streets, safe school streets, walking to school, biking to school, walking to the park, all of these things that we do because we don't feel like traffic safety is safe for our kids. And what we're really doing, in my opinion, is preventing kids from having a full and complete life. And then, of course, the empty list on the right is things that drivers have sacrificed. So as you think about teaching our children these safe bicycling and walking skills, it's really important if you can do that, to plan ahead, plan trips in advance and leave time. If you're going to take a trip that you would normally drive and you want to move it over to walking or bicycling. We don't all have school-aged children that need to be walked to school, but we have neighbors and we have grandchildren and we have nieces and nephews that we can help walk to school. I mean, it's actually one of my favorite parts of the whole day. It's important to teach and model traffic safety skills when we walk our children to school. And Ride Illinois, which is an amazing resource, has a bike safety quiz. It's really a wonderful resource for when you are a parent and you want to, or a grandparent or a neighbor, and you want to help children understand bicycle and pedestrian safety. The second way to go is to return to transit as soon as you feel safe doing so. As you heard in the news, transit took a huge hit during the pandemic. It was under threat of literally sinking until the federal government recently stepped in with some aid. But it's important to put a couple truths out there when it comes to transit. Since January 21, there has been a federal mask mandate on all transit service. So it has made it easier to enforce the use of masks. It's also made compliance skyrocket. So most people on transit are using masks now, and it's federal law. The good news is that ridership is quite low, so social distancing is normally possible for those who want to practice social distancing, which is recommended by the CDC. And the American Public Transportation Association completed a study in the fall that indicated no demonstrated correlation between increases in ridership and spreading events for COVID-19. So as ridership increased after the stay-at-home order, there were no super spreading events on transit, and that is still true. So it is safer than a lot of people assume it to be, and there are very high levels of cleaning protocols in place. There's a very high turnover rate of the air inside transit vehicles, which is one of the things that people think makes it safe. So as soon as you're vaccinated and comfortable with the numbers, we encourage you to try transit. There are some very cool apps out there that make transit so much easier than it used to be. There's one called Transit, which is my personal favorite, although Ventro just recently improved as well. These are apps that determine your location and your transit options and timing, and then they'll also tell you how fast you can get there on different modes of transit. So it could be on rail or bus. It takes all the guesswork out of games. It makes riding transit like a game, and it takes a lot of the guesswork out. It also tells you real-time arrivals for buses and trains, which is fun. So when you're trying transit or returning to transit, plan ahead. If you're unfamiliar with transit, we encourage you to do it for leisure for the first time. Leave time for user error, although the apps do eliminate some of that. Riding transit is the opportunity for you to travel and look at your phone, unlike driving. So take advantage of not being behind it. Read something to catch up on your phone-based activities. Contactless payment is a norm now on most transit services. And Evanston is improving the bus stops in town. So look for improved bus stops, more accessible bus stops as well. And there is talk of making transit in the Chicago region very attractive through some past incentives to encourage people to get there. The third way to get there is to participate. Go Evanston likes to appear at city council meetings and have events, so we encourage others to do that too. The main thing I want to focus on today, though, is there are 3 really important street projects happening in Evanston right now. One is the Church Street project between Dodge and McCormick. The second one is Chicago Avenue between Davis and Howard. And the third one is Oakton between Asbury and the Channel. These projects are all poised to create connected and consistent networks for pedestrians and bicyclists, improve transit access as well. They are being looked at as complete streets projects, which is a topic that really looks at the needs of all different kinds of users of a street and not just that of drivers. It will support active transportation access, which is walking, bicycling, and transit access between schools, jobs, shopping, and home. They all have an accessibility component meant to expand access by people who are mobility challenged, whether in wheelchairs or or other mobility issues. And so we encourage everyone to engage in these projects, and the city has websites for each of them. The fourth way to get there is to support active transportation, even if you're not using it. So not all of us can be on a bike all the time. Sometimes we're in a car, and it's really important to understand how you can support bicyclists and pedestrians even when you're driving. The most important thing to do is to slow down. There's a speed epidemic happening in our country right now and in our region. 2020 was the deadliest year for traffic safety on record. And a lot of that had to do with high levels of speed. And pedestrians are very susceptible to speed. So it's important to drive slow when pedestrians and bicyclists are present. No one wants to know the outcome of that other option there. Be predictable. You know, you get through all these stop signs in Evanston, and when you're at a stop sign with a bicyclist, I always say there's like social dance that goes on where you want to make eye contact and understand who's going to stop, and the cyclist puts their foot down. That usually means they just want the car to go, and there's all these kinds of social cues. But I'll tell you, blinkers are just as important for bicyclists to understand, to see, and to anticipate the turning movements of cars as other cars. So when you're at a stop sign and you're driving, use your blinker, even if the only other person at the intersection is a bicyclist. Avoid areas where there are high numbers of bicyclists and pedestrians at peak times, school times, those things. You know, the more cars, the less safe those places are. And that's a very vulnerable population we want to protect. Illinois passed the Dutch Reach as part of the education curriculum. This is when drivers are encouraged to use their far hand when opening their door, which forces them to look behind their shoulder for bicyclists. So to avoid the dooring of bicyclists as they use our streets. It's a standard practice now. It's one that is encouraged by the Illinois Department of Transportation. It's certainly disable your devices when you drive. It's important to pay attention, and it's also illegal. And there is actually a bike safety quiz for drivers on the Ride Illinois site. So if you want to be the most responsible, conscientious driver, you can take that quiz. All right, and finally, the last way to get there is to just go. And this is kind of just the ways that if you want to expand your mobility options, we encourage you to get a map, get a light, get a helmet, get a lock. Get a tune-up for your bike and get a tune-up for your kid's bike. So get ready. Get a transit app, like I mentioned. Walk or roll a child to school. Oh, not really. Find a destination and a route. We like to make activities of walking to lunch on the weekend, or something that makes it fun for kids to reach somewhere, do something fun, and then walk home. Go and like our Go Evanston page and the CGP pages on Facebook. Try Divvy. Evanston has an amazing bike share program. We're really lucky to have it, and ridership has gone during the pandemic. So give it a try. And that's something that there's a little bit of a learning curve. So try it on your leisure time before you have to do it under time pressure. Participate in the public meetings, as I mentioned, and go safely, most importantly. And have fun. All right, that wraps it up for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicki. Wowie, what an amazing start to our couple of days. Two phenomenal presentations. I'm so excited. I promised Vicki that I would ask the transit questions first because she has to head off to a work engagement. I see one from Janet Alexander asking, are seniors without computer access and knowledge taken into account with this list of tips? What are your recommendations? Like, there's a lot of apps and things that people might not have access to.
It's true. And there are a lot of ways in which the city is exploring ways to maximize access. to things like the parking program, because now a lot of this stuff is app-based. Each of the options I presented as having app-based services, of course, can be done the traditional way. You can still get on a bus and pay. The contactless stuff is just an option. You know, one of the things, AARP is a real partner in the mobility campaign, because aging in place and the ability to still take advantage of your community without being behind the wheel of a car is something that is increasingly important. So it is, we work closely on programs with AARP and consider them a partner, and hear more about the concerns and procedures. It's really important population to serve in terms of mobility.
And Vicki, before you go, if you could say a sentence or two about my favorite topic, the 15-minute city.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes. The 15-minute city is a concept. I think it's been pioneered by the city of Paris. I think it's a 10-minute city in Paris. But it is an urban planning goal that attempts to create mixed-use areas or neighborhoods where you can access all of your basic needs within a 10 or 15-minute walk of your home. So, you know, there's a long history in the United States of separating out uses. You know, we have the shopping district over there and the homes over here. Zoning did a lot of damage to the way we use our landscape. But there is a movement now among places like Evanston and Chicago and places, and the pandemic has only highlighted it as a need for people to be able to access what they need on foot or bicycle within a short walking distance. And it's something that our incoming mayor is talking about as a concept. And Evanston has those bones. I mean, we still have our neighborhood schools. We have small shopping districts. It's really something to highlight and celebrate and amplify.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Vicki. I know you need to go. I'm going to go ahead but thank you.
For any questions, we can grab the chat.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So to Colleen and Grace, a question from Mark is, some universities encourage their faculty to also be engaged with private industry in their area of expertise. Is this true for Northwestern? And actually, I think you can see in the chat, Mark wants you to reach out to him directly, but I think that's an interesting question more broadly for in terms of community partnership opportunities, right?
Yes, I would have to look more into this because Colleen and I are both in STEM. So the idea of community collaboration is not as strong as it is in other disciplines. But I definitely know that there's encouragement to collaborate, but I do think that the incentives sometimes are lacking. / the length of engagement often is dependent on certain faculty projects. So I definitely think that Northwestern could better incentivize these collaboratory efforts. And there are ways that other universities are incentivizing long-term community collaboration. I definitely think that's something to work on. And in terms of contact info, that's definitely something that we both agree that Northwestern should be building out, but maybe in the intermediary stages, we should be trying to find those people and seeing their interest and engagement, because they definitely are people that want to work. But I just think right now they're maybe in their bubble and we're in our bubble and we're not touching base with each other. Colleen, do you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, Mark, I think your question speaks a lot to this idea that Grace mentioned before, that we're like hoping that Northwestern could create this database of faculty. And so then that would allow community members to really see who is out there and what they're doing to kind of encourage this collaboration. In the meantime, since that database doesn't currently exist, I'm happy to put my email address in the chat so that you can reach out to myself or Grace, and we might be able to help a little bit kind of navigate faculty members that are involved in environmental work. But I think, like Grace mentioned, it does tend to vary a lot from department to department and just in terms of what different faculty members are researching at the moment in terms of how much private industry engagement they have. But yeah, I'll type my my email address in the chat so that anyone can reach out.
Fantastic. Also, Sylvia asked about a possible collaboration with the District 65 green teams. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how there's been a greater effort between Northwestern and the city around collaboration. And I know they have offices at ETHS and they're more involved in the schools. And I feel like this will be kind of the next chapter, right, of collaboration. But I because of time, and I regret not getting to all the questions for Vicki before she had to go, but I would encourage Sylvia also to snag your email information from the chat. I see, questions from Jerry and Mary Beth also that are more directed to Vicki, and we can follow up with those and hold on to them. And Claire says she's also interested in a one-stop shop gateway for collaborations. So science curriculum, District 65, District 202. So I'm so personally, I do think the partnership with the 5 major employers in Evanston is utterly critical to reaching our CARP goals, and Northwestern has so much potential to take a leadership role in this. And I'm so grateful to you guys for moving that forward in a big way. Okay, I think it is time for us to say our goodbyes. Let me find my little notes here. Thank you for your patience.
If anybody wants to stay for the next presentation on resources matter, ways to recycle, right, and manage your own waste with Mary Ellen from SWANC, just stay tuned. We're starting in 9 minutes. Thank you.
Oh, we have 9 minutes still. So we could continue our discussion a little bit.
Maybe 2 or 3 more minutes because people are going
2 or
to
3 more minutes. We want okay.
Yeah, so something I wanted to add is that I do think the nature of university research is changing. I think that a lot of this past year has called into question the relevance of universities, especially because research often is hidden behind paywalls and is only read by people that are within academic communities. And I was at a talk last week where they said this person who had left academia basically said that the theory of academia is 50 years behind where we need it to be, which is very daunting. And so I think that a lot of this relevance, I think, is actually starting to come from undergraduates and graduate students. I often find that that's where there are people that want to do things differently. So I do think that's an element that I am personally interested in, is how we mobilize students. And as a result, with those students mobilized, faculty need to come along if they want to also stay, again, relevant to the time.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a college age person in my life, and it's just a whole existential question about academia and its role, for sure. Did you want to say a last remark, Colleen, or you?
No, I just want to say thank you so much, Rachel, for organizing this and for letting us be a part of it. It was really a pleasure. So thank you.
And and everybody who's watching, sign up for the CGE newsletter, because we will, as things form through Northwestern, will be your source for information.